Welcome to The Broker Experience. We are your hosts. My name is Rick Dulai, and I'm joined by Mr. Rob Scalisi and Mr. Charles Cascione.
I like it, Charles.
Yeah.
Charles.
Oh, yeah.
It's very formal today.
Yeah, sorry.
Please call me Chuck.
Okay.
I've been called lots of
Charles the Third.
I think we should call him Chip.
Exactly.
Yeah. Today's topic, we're going to talk about market valuations and kind of the different variations of them and the difference between what realtors, appraisers, and online sources, how they work and what they actually mean and if they're useful or not.
Well, we should have brought that meme that you ever see that meme on Facebook? What the tax man thinks of your house?
Yeah.
What the
tax man
buyers
thinks it's a mansion,
exactly,
and your parents think it's this party
Piece of
house,
crap, yeah.
And then you think of it as
it's
like
a palace,
yep.
yeah. So
That's a good meme.
yep.
But just to start it off, let's start with some definitions. I think that'll help kind of frame our discussion. A comparative or comparable or competitive market analysis versus a broker price opinion versus an appraisal.
Those are the same. Broker price opinion and CMA are kind of the same thing.
Pretty much the same.
The banks call the broker price opinion because they don't understand how it works. But a CMA and a BPO are.
Here's, I think, the defining thing there. When you're doing it for the bank, they call it a broker price opinion, meaning it's no different than the market analysis. However, it's not being done by an appraiser.
Right.
They're trying to get a quick, cheap valuation that's not an appraisal.
We'd have to pay the appraiser. We don't have to pay the broker. We're just going to tease him with getting the listing.
So why don't we define that? What is an appraisal and why is that different than a CMA or a BPO?
Well, here's the thing. Appraisals, you would normally say, are typically used when there's a purchase involved, but not always the case. An appraiser is going to be state licensed as an appraiser,
right?
Versus a realtor is licensed as a realtor or a broker, right? Okay. So you can't, even though I think we really do perform the same tasks, and I think a real distinguishing thing between an appraisal and a market analysis is that the market analysis will typically give you a range of value, right? Because we're saying, here's what other buyers and sellers have typically paid for similar properties, right? Low, median, average, high values. The appraisers always bring it in at a finite number. Right. And here's interesting about that. When you look at their comps, right, they'll usually have 3 to 6 comps, and they'll make adjustments to those comps for things
I was going to mention that
they have or don't have versus what the subject property has or doesn't have. And they don't come in at the exact number. They come up with a range of value, but yet they don't use that range.
Right.
And I think in a purchase, we've got a copy of the purchase agreement. So there is the reason, or at least some justification as to why it came in at the exact number, because it fell within that range, but there was a number that the buyer agreed to pay, seller willing, to accept number. But let's just say that you were doing it for the purpose of a divorce, where a judge needed the value. You still see a range of value, but you come up with a finite number. And I always wonder, say on a refinance or a divorce situation where somebody's refinancing, they're like, what are you looking to get out of the house? Well, we're going to take an equity line, and I think my house is worth $350, and lo and behold, the appraisal comes in at $350.
Exactly.
Right.
So just interesting.
Yeah. So I guess the way I've done my market analysis for clients, I don't get into a lot of adjustments. I tend to stay away from that. Try to find the houses that are the most similar.
Right.
I may mention, oh yeah, that one had a finished basement, or you have a finished basement and they don't. But sometimes getting into too much of the adjustments, like, okay, well,
they had a patio,
right? And then we're going to adjust. We're going to adjust the comp down $2,500 to make it more conforming. And I know appraisers spend more time doing that kind of stuff because I'm just coming up with a general idea anyway.
Right.
And the other thing that I do is and this is probably not. I'm not recommending everybody do this. You have to know the area. You have to know the property. But sometimes I will base my suggested list price on the other actives instead of the solds, because if I know we can come in
just like every homeowner.
Well, no, not that way. The other way. So if all the houses are 329, 339, 319, I will sometimes say, look, okay, we can justify 305 in the sold comps, but I think we should list it at 299 based on these other listings because you'll be just under everybody else, and you're going to attract all the people that are looking at those houses, and maybe we can build a bidding war or build some more interest.
Yeah, but that's not what the homeowner wants. The
I know,
homeowner
I
wants
know.
what was the highest house that's
I know.
sold in my neighborhood that's somewhat close.
Right.
I want to go $5,000 more than that.
Right,
or
but this is a
10,000 more than
discussion
that.
I'm having with them, right?
Okay.
You're being conservative. I want to go 50 grand more than that one.
Yeah. Oh,
anyway,
I remember when they did that.
getting back to
We did a lot more work than they did.
Getting back to your question, you were saying, the difference between the CMA, market analysis, BPO, and appraisal. An appraiser, as you know, to get a real estate license, it's a 40-hour class, pass a test, and you're in business.
Right.
Okay. As an appraiser, you have to go through 2,000 hours of working under another appraiser,
Right.
which is a whole year. If you
Right.
did it 8 hours a day,
Right.
that's 2,050 hours.
Yep.
So it's a whole year's worth of working under an appraiser, checking your work, doing this. So they tried to make it a little bit more accurate with an appraisal. Now, at one time we were licensed to do appraisals back many, many moons ago when I first started this business. But so now they've separated the real estate agent and the appraiser's license. So with an appraisal, their thinking behind that is you're going to get a more accurate view of that.
Yeah.
I disagree because a lot of times the banks will order an appraisal from the guy they use all the time, which is in Battle
area.
Creek,
Yeah.
and he's coming to Sterling Heights to do an appraisal. Well, okay, that's not even close. Where an agent, a good agent. Now, of course, I said 40 hours, but typically, if somebody like us that's been in the business quite a while, you've got the experience to say, look, here's what's going on in the marketplace. Here's what we can really expect to get out of this house, and then here's my CMA price.
Right. I guess when I'm thinking about it in the more real world terms, the CMA, the market analysis, is done by a real estate agent or a broker, but it's got a little more formatting to it. It's got a little bit more, it's got more of an agenda to it. We're looking at things like days on market or pricing strategy. We're kind of talking to the person who needs this market analysis about how to price their house for sale in the market. So
how to actually sell it.
That's why I'm saying
you don't need to sell it.
Exactly.
It's already sold.
It's a little more, generalized. It's a little more subjective, whereas an appraiser maybe is a little more detailed and objective. They're doing things like adjustments. They got a lot more information on their report, but it's not necessarily a marketing strategy. It's not necessarily taking into consideration, what the trend is. Because what if the market's going up or the market's going down? If you're looking at past comps, you're already not using the correct pricing strategy, because if the market's going up, you're going to underprice it. But if the market was going down, you'd be overpricing it. Right. So you almost have to nail it perfect.
That's the problem with appraisals is it's always rear looking. It's always, looking in the rear view mirror, and it doesn't work.
Yeah.
And again, the appraiser is there for one reason. It's so that the bank doesn't lend more on the house than the house is worth. They want to keep their 20% profit margin, or 20% equity position in that property, so that they don't give Mr. and Mrs. Homeowner any more money than they can foreclose and get the house back and sell it, so the bank doesn't get hurt. It's kind of sick that the homeowner pays for the report, but it's to protect the bank.
Yeah. I always say that.
How about
too.
the bank paying for that report?
But even just the difference between a CMA and a BPO, even though in theory there's no difference, you're just doing the same thing, I think it ends up in the end product. For CMA, it is a marketing piece. It's usually branded. It's usually has an agenda to it. Whereas a BPO, you're literally just pulling 3 actives, 3 solds, averaging it out, submitting the report. It's data the way an appraisal is, without all the details of the appraisal.
Correct.
Oddly enough, Rick, when you talked about overpricing or underpricing based on market going up or down, A tool that I use when I do my market analysis, I of course incorporate the active listings, and I think there's value to looking at those and using that as a strategy to educate your seller where to price it or where they would place, assuming that, the average buyer is not going to look at the one house on the one street. They're going to look at everything that's available, assuming similar price range too. Pending sales, though, I've used the saying, pending is trending.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is that, obviously we have sold values. We have days on market, average sold price, low, median, high, average, et cetera. But you can see that with the pending, you will see days on market as an average, and you will see average asking prices. So if you have a certain value, X, whatever it is, and you're noticing short times on market with pending sales and the values are all up, kind of an indication. Now, they haven't closed and appraised yet, but an indication this market's still going upward.
Right.
Correct.
And of course,
very good point.
The opposite being true as well. All of a sudden, you're seeing longer days on market for pending and values are lower than what those sales were. Then throw in, let's take a glance at those active listings. Are there 10 of them available? Are there one? Are there 0? Because now you're going to massage this whole thing into a very, very educated approach to what is this house most likely to bring? And then one thing that I will add about using the CMA program in Real Comp, I've showed you, it does allow you to make those adjustments, not as detailed as an appraisal report, but on certain things, say finished basement, bathroom count,
extra car
garage, square footage, I will use those adjusting tools.
Yeah. Okay.
And what's cool about it is once you've looked at enough appraisals, you can get an idea what does the typical appraiser use, for a basement or for an extra bathroom or bedroom or whatever. And when you do that, I like the format because it'll say, okay, here's your values, low, median, average, high, non-adjusted. And then it'll also show you adjusted values. And one of the things that is really, at least in my opinion, very valuable, I look at those median and average numbers on both the adjusted and non-adjusted values and see if we have a consistent bulk, because we all know like the extreme highs, extreme lows are exactly that. And in this market or the most recent 5 years of this market, right? Yeah. I've told people, even though somebody is the low, it's almost 100% you're not going to get a low number.
Yeah.
There is a low number. There's just got to be one, as there's got to be a high number in average and median. But we can almost discount the low no matter what it is. And then, of course, the high, depending on how updated your house is and what was that sold high one like, right? You could say, okay, we are like that, and maybe we'll gravitate towards the high. But if we're not quite to that caliber, grab those bulk of those median and average numbers on both adjusted and non, and it's pretty darn accurate.
Close. You know what? It's funny that you said that too, though, because leave it to Rob to make the perfect CMA. He does all the adjustments and everything.
Of course.
But how much time are you spending then when you make a CMA? Because I guess for me, I feel like I have my thumb on the pulse of the markets that I work pretty well. I can go into a neighborhood and be like, oh yeah, you're going to get about 150 a square foot or in this neighborhood, just off the top. And I may be off, and that's why I'm going to do a proper, do a little bit of research and look at the data. But when I'm actually doing the market analysis, I tend to kind of go through it quickly. I pick the ones that are most closely because I want to talk more than I want to show them papers and point to a number.
Yeah, and I don't really show them the adjustments. I think it was really more of a challenge just for myself.
Oh, okay.
And to look at it.
Use the data if the data is available. Why not use it?
And the thing is, if you had a seller that says, "Well, I got 3 bathrooms and he only had 2," and I made an adjustment for that.
Right.
And you got value for that.
Good point.
But his was a bigger house than yours, and so that those two things offset each other in the way of a number.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, let's face it, this is to give you an idea. And I've often said to sellers, listen, I don't have a crystal ball. This is academic, right? Because it's just based on numbers. But if you get what's the mantra in value, right? Buyer willing to pay
and a
seller willing to accept, provided they're educated about the market. So if some buyer wants to pay more than my numbers show and the bank wants to lend on that, God bless them. They hit a home run. I'm happy for you.
Right.
But if the appraisal came in low versus what some buyer was willing to pay, and that low number lands in my analysis, I also have that information to back up, say,
look,
and
I
don't want
told
to
you
say
it
like
could
I
be this.
told you so,
Yeah,
but
Right.
you know,
here it is. This was in my range, so it's not unreasonable.
yeah, this is not a wrong number.
But what about when it maybe is unreasonable, like it is too low, and you're like, this guy missed something, or this girl missed something? What do
Well, then that's
You can-
ammunition to go back to the appraiser.
and
And I've
challenge the
used
appraiser.
that format to say, here you go. This is what I came up with.
Right.
And
How
I've
are-
seen it where you can challenge an appraiser, but I always tell everybody, look, so if you're challenging an appraisal, you got to say, hey, look, sir or ma'am, you're wrong, and here's why you're
yeah,
wrong.
yeah. Good luck.
How many people like to admit that they're wrong?
No.
Nobody,
Right.
Especially a state licensed appraiser.
Right.
So it's a tough. You're better off scrapping that one and trying to get a different one. Just get a different appraiser out there.
Yeah.
But I have seen it happen, and if you've got the data, you can do that. But
And this is not to crap all over appraisers, although it's
Oh, yeah,
going to
not at
sound
all.
like I am a little bit. Think about this, especially in recent markets. When you take a buyer out and show them houses, how many houses do you end up showing them before they decide on that one?
quite a few.
How many?
30.
30,
30,
40,
let's say,
50,
yeah.
60 sometimes,
Yeah,
right?
that's happened
How
for
many does
sure.
the appraiser show up for?
That
One.
One.
That one.
So who's better versed at really determining market conditions and why this house is worth or not worth what we offered?
Well, that's why I was saying, like, I feel like I have my thumb on the pulse of the market in the areas that I work in, and I have more faith in my instinct based on that than the actual technical analysis of the numbers. Which I'm going to bring that. I'm going to come back to that in a little bit because I
Kinda
got
gotta
another
use
point to.
both,
Yeah.
You have to use both your instincts of the market, your like Rob said, you've shown these people 30 houses, so in that price range, what the other
Right.
29 houses were like. So when you do find the house that's the
Right.
one, okay, now we'll talk about paying for it. And I always say the same thing about if dad is helping you or the
Right.
decision, you need the decision maker at all of the houses because
yeah.
the kids get to go look at 30 houses. Dad comes to the one that they looked at, and dad poo-poos the
Then, yeah.
idea because, you can get better than that. Well, he doesn't have the
Yeah.
benefit of looking at the 30 junk that was
That
houses
is
that
out
were on
there,
the market.
yeah.
So this is the best of the bunch. So
Right.
Here's
same
a
type
recent
of thing.
appraiser story, by the way. This just
Okay.
happened to me last week. I have a beautiful listing in Rochester Hill,
Okay.
remodeled kitchen, new windows, new furnace, new air, new water heater, updated bathrooms, right? Multiple offers on the house.
I remember that.
Of course, we sold it. The appraiser calls me. Hey, I'm trying to finish up the appraisal on your house on X Street. I said, sure. What's going on? He said, well, can you tell me, does that house have any updates?
Oh,
And I said,
Weren't you there?
that's exactly what I said to him. I said, well, I'm sorry. Did you go to the house yet? He said, yes. And I said, did you go in the house? And he said, well, your remarks say shaker style cabinets. I said, that's not what I asked you. I asked you if you went in the house. He said, well, I don't see anything else in the remarks. I said, then you're not reading my listing because the remarks clearly outline the updates that are in the house. But my question still remains, did you go in the house?
right.
He said, you know what? You're being rude. And he hung up on me.
Serious.
Swear to God. I
Yeah, you were being
I'm
immediately,
being
rude.
rude because I asked you if you went to the house.
Right. He knew he was busted.
I called the lender immediately. I said, we have a problem. If this appraisal comes in low, here's what happened.
Yeah.
And they were made aware. They're like, you got to be kidding me. I said, absolutely not. I couldn't even fathom being the appraiser, calling an agent, asking if there were updates.
Yeah. It's
I mean,
he should have been embarrassed to make that
You
call.
went to the house
Right.
and went
No,
in
he
the
didn't.
house.
So you
Obviously,
guys-
he
obviously
didn't.
he did.
He was doing a desktop appraisal is what he was doing and not going to the house, which I can't understand. Doesn't most banks on the appraisal require pictures? Or was he using your marketing photos?
I don't know. And
Maybe.
you
Or
know,
he could have had somebody drive by and take a picture.
Yeah, but you need pictures on the inside.
I know.
he could have been using mine. And my point to the lender, I said, and I asked the question, doesn't he have to go in? And I have no problem answering the questions, but you say, hey, listen, we were only required to do a desktop appraisal on this one for
Just
whatever
tell you that.
reason.
Be
Okay.
upfront.
So could you clarify what was the kitchen really like
Right.
or what, I would have happily answered the questions, but it just struck me as odd, that this guy is the licensed appraiser.
Yeah.
And then the very next morning, the appraisal was on the lender's desk and it hit value. And
Of course, because it was going to anyway, right? 99 times out of 100, he was going to collect $400 for sitting at his computer and just cranking through these reports. He got the one jerk that asked him the question if he went inside the house.
Only because he was asking the stupid question.
I know.
Were there any updates on
Usually
the house?
they would just answer his question. He'd finish his
that's the whole
report.
thing,
It was going to appraise.
The whole thing. And they're sitting with a copy of our purchase agreement.
Right.
Which is the stupidest thing I've ever heard of.
Yeah, we talked about that previously. It messes everything up.
The appraiser is sitting there looking at a copy of a purchase agreement, which the buyer and seller agreed at X price.
Yeah.
Okay. That influences his work, guaranteed. Okay. So if you want a blind opinion of value, you wouldn't give him that copy,
right?
And let it come in wherever it comes in. If it's high, it's low, whatever. But they don't do that. It's silly.
I felt like if I was the buyer of that property, I'd be really upset knowing that I paid $350 or $500 for an appraisal.
And the guy's
I don't
lazy.
think this guy ever went in the house.
Yeah.
Right.
Unfortunately, man, it is a nice house and it is updated. So my pictures do reflect its true condition.
Yeah.
Obviously a multiple offer situation, but it really rubbed me the wrong way.
That makes me think the guy didn't go to the house and didn't even look at the pictures.
Yeah, it seemed like you weren't even reading the remarks.
If I go online and look at your pictures, I'm going to see that they're newer cabinets.
Yeah. And Rob's saying it was in the remarks.
Yeah.
The guy wasn't even reading the whole remarks.
It just doesn't make sense to me.
But so that's appraisals and everything. But coming back to a market analysis, what about doing a CMA for your buyers when you're writing an offer? How often are you doing that? And how formal of a market analysis do you do?
I do the exact same approach as if I was listing the house, adjustments and all.
Yeah. So you do a formal report and then what do you do? Do you usually make a PDF and email them the PDF or email the link?
The link and or PDF. Exactly.
Yeah.
I don't put in all the marketing pieces like,
fluff
about me.
None of that stuff. But I do the map so that you can see here's our comps.
I do the table with the, it shows the comps. I do the individual listings of the comps, and I'll do a high-low thing or whatever.
Yeah, and again,
anything that's data.
The thing that you're trying to do when you're doing that for a buyer is you're just trying to make sure that at least they're in the range. You know, if the house is 480, you don't want to be 520. You just want to make sure that you're at least close to the range and then it becomes a negotiating thing. Is it worth the 480 that it's listed for, or whatever price it's listed for?
Right.
So.
No, I think that the other value of doing it is, let's just say that the buyer's appraisal comes in low.
Yeah.
Now you've got your data.
You've got your ammo. Yeah,
Again,
absolutely.
All of this stuff, everybody, whether you're the seller or the buyer, accept this high offer, pay the high offer. If it doesn't appraise, you're not getting to a closing table.
Exactly.
Hedge those problems right out of the gate.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. So maybe kind of the next category of these market values. And I might take an unpopular opinion
Just say
here.
it.
Okay.
Just say the Z
Don't
word.
use the Z word.
Zestimates. Okay. Zillow or even any online.
Right.
Redfin
Redfin
has
does
their
it,
own.
and,
They have their own. They're using these sophisticated algorithms. They're looking at, I think you went to a conference once, Chuck, that they told you they use 1.2 million data points for every single Zestimate.
That was back then. They probably use
it's probably more now.
But yes, they said they use a lot of data points,
which
should, in a perfect world, get you really close, or really, really close, because we're not looking at 1.2 million in data points.
Right.
We might be looking at 50 or 20.
So then why does it have such a bad reputation?
Because the computer can't analyze the market and say, can't do a market analysis and say, hey, this house has this, and this, compare it to that other property that was sold for this. So
ChatGPT might be able to do that now.
Possibly.
I wonder if Zillow's going to start using some of these AI.
Zillow themselves even said at that same conference, they said, if you want a Zestimate, call us and look at our thing. If you want an Exactimate, call your realtor.
Yeah.
So, And they know, and as a matter of fact, the proof that they know they're wrong on their estimates is the fact that they lost billions of dollars buying houses.
Yeah.
Oh,
based on their estimates.
Exactly.
You know, and I don't know the answer to this question, but when you pull up a Zestimate, because I do that after I'm done with my market analysis.
Okay.
Why do you think I do that?
Sanity check?
No, just to not influence your decision or not try to meet some number. Or,
but afterwards, he's saying, why does he do it after?
I do it after
I
do
what
the analysis.
Well,
also to see what the homeowner's going to see.
Yes.
That's right there.
That's what I was
do it
get
because I know the homeowner did it, and I want to see what they think it is. Because for whatever reason, they seem to rely on Zillow. And I've said, when it's accurate to what we come up with, it's a coincidence.
Exactly.
And when it's not, it's also just a coincidence.
Right.
Because
it's too
the
random.
way I understand it is they'll take, say, a neighborhood and you say, type in an address, and they'll pull up all these houses with prices on there. And they just massage all of it. You know, well, that one's 1,800 square feet, and this one's 2,700 square feet, and this one just sold.
Shouldn't even be in
that
the same
one was
report.
4 years ago.
Yeah.
But they massage all of those numbers together.
Yeah.
And that's what I mean. Sometimes because of those highs or lows, it just for your particular property, the number comes out about right.
Yeah.
And other times it's completely off, depending on how much data they're using.
And that Zestimate doesn't know if that was a remodeled kitchen, that was 3 new bathrooms, this was, burnt down in a fire and it was totally rebuilt.
Right.
The Zestimate doesn't know any of that. So again, he's right to justify it because your seller's going to look at that. You're going to come in with a market analysis and say, hey, price should be X. They're going to say, well, Zillow says it's 20,000 higher, or Zillow says it's 20,000 lower. They're you got to then justify why you're correct and Zillow's wrong.
So that's my argument for looking at a Zestimate is when you list a house, buyers are going to be looking at the Zestimate also. And if your price is way above the Zestimate, they feel like, oh, we should offer lower. And
sometimes,
if your listing price is lower than this estimate, they feel like they're getting a deal because they rely on it, right? So I like to know it, and I might even use it, knowing that hey, everybody's going to look at this estimate, whether it's accurate or not becomes irrelevant.
Well, the SEV
it just becomes
too.
A strategy now.
You could look at the SEV too, if
but people don't.
Well, I do.
Yeah, no, I mean like the average public.
I'm looking at the SEV. I'm looking at the Zestimate. I'm looking at my market analysis.
Right.
I'm looking at smoke signals and whatever. To determine. I'm trying to really come up with the right data for this property.
Right.
Let me ask you this about Zillow. Have they always done the range of value? I seem like I've just started noticing that. So when you type in an address, it'll give you a Zestimate, and it's big and bold at the top. But below it now, they go, but it could be as low as, or it could be as high.
Yeah, they usually have a chart.
I never saw that.
Well, they've been doing that for quite a while. And if the range is real small, it's more accurate. It's going to be more accurate. But if the range is real big, it could be way off because, you're comparing $50,000 houses with $250,000 houses.
So here's what I typically do.
Square mile, let's say, or 2 miles.
Typically what I'll do is I'll look at this estimate and then I'll go down and they'll have similar properties. And I'm guessing those similar properties are being used in this estimate somehow. I don't really know, but I'll scroll through those real quick and see what are the price range of those? Because sometimes you'll see $199 and then $299. You're like, okay, this is too much of a weird mixture.
Right.
Maybe it's crossing a major road or something.
Right.
But if they are consistently coming in, $249, $239, $259, and they all look similar to my house, then I'll be like, okay, the Zestimate number is probably pretty accurate, and I want to keep that in mind because I know the public is looking at it.
That's the only reason is that the public is looking at it, and it really doesn't mean anything. We do a market analysis based on comparable sales, and we're going to get you close, very close. They're throwing darts at a board, to be honest with you.
And I think a lot of what we do that is the bigger benefit is, when you're in the business full time like we are, with the number of years that we've been doing this, you were just out there every day.
Yeah.
And you have the experience. We're interpreting the market every day.
Right.
And it's constantly changing. So when you start seeing properties and what people are asking, and then you go on a listing appointment, you're like, geez, if these people down here are getting these kind of numbers,
if they got 300, you should get 600.
You're 600. And I've actually had sellers like, oh no, you're crazy. And I'm like, you need to listen to me.
Right.
In Florida, where we like to go, the realtor told me that he says they weren't even going off of comps anymore. They'd say, what do you want for the house? And they just list it because it was just prices were just going so crazy.
Yeah. I mean, one thing here in Michigan, a lot of our neighborhoods are very conforming. You're going to have very similar house next to in the same subdivision.
Similarly year built, similarly built by the same builder.
And then one house has gold toilets in it and the other one doesn't. It's not going to change the value because they're all too conforming.
Right.
So they kind of max out at a max value. It's
called a homogeneous neighborhood.
Yes.
And that's why they built them that way, so that they would maintain value.
Yeah. But I've noticed, like, you and I are doing stuff in New Jersey, and that's not the case there.
No,
and
it's all over.
It may be in some areas, but geez, you could have a $500,000 house, and right next to it could be a $1.2 million house. Next to that could be a $700,000 house, and there are various states of updates and repairs over the years, and you could take maybe that cheaper house and fix all the insulation and change all the doors and trim and put a new kitchen and bathrooms into it. And now all of a sudden you took this $500,000 house and made it into a $900,000 house. It's kind of
doesn't happen around here. You're capped here. It's and it's probably because the way the metropolitan Detroit area was made, it's kind of concentric circles is how it was developed, from Detroit outward.
But that also makes it difficult to come up with values. Like if you're going to list a house, that means you got to know more than just what our house is selling for. You got to understand what kind of upgrades are there and what kind of finishes the person has, and what kind of return you get for that.
Right.
So, okay, going back to the market analysis versus a Zestimate. Do you ever think that looking at the Zestimate blind gives you any information or gives you any help?
As a real estate professional, or
even as a real estate
consumer?
professional?
I don't
you
know.
Don't feel like it gives you kind of a general idea of, okay, the estimate's $300,000. That house is that in a neighborhood of $300,000 houses.
I would rather look at this the SEV, to be honest with you. I mean that the state's appraiser or the municipality's appraiser says it's worth X rather than the Zestimate. But I guess it's okay for a quick possible look value. Just
I'd be interested to know,
value.
like, what is the difference between what Zillow does versus what Realtor.com does and what Redfin does? Because then could you check all three and kind of get an idea too, like go through all three? Because the reason I'm saying that is often you're out showing houses or whatever, and you have your phone with you. It's not always the most convenient time to be quickly doing a market analysis, but you can look it up on Zillow real quick. You can look it up on Redfin real quick and just see what they think.
It's funny. When you said, do you think Zillow has any value?
Yeah.
Were you referring to us
Yes.
specifically?
Yeah, to us.
See, I've never used it that way. I've never, only because the amount of time I've been doing this, I could, in my market area, I could almost look at any neighborhood and any house and just go, these are probably X,
right?
And probably, not even probably, will be fairly accurate.
Yeah, the Rob estimate is better than this estimate.
So
True.
I was just in Florida last week, as you know, right? And Waze, coming back from the airport, took us through a neighborhood, probably to avoid some traffic or whatever. So there were a couple houses for sale, very close to the South Bridge there in Siesta Key.
Okay.
And I mean, it's just looks like a very moderate neighborhood, small ranches, and I'm assuming no basement, and I'm trying to compare them to like what they look like. To me, they look like maybe a that pocket in Shelby Township of
Yeah.
those houses on slabs and crawls and
Yep.
just very small, moderate ranches or whatever. And my daughter was in the car, and I said, I wonder what these houses are going for. What do you think? And I was driving, so she whips out her phone. I go, oh, there's a for sale sign. Type in this address. She types it up. Chuck hit it on the number at $700,000
My goodness.
for like a beat up looking 1,200 square foot ranch that needed a roof, needed landscaping. And I was like, it's just amazing.
The beach is right there.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a mile away from the Gulf of Mexico.
Exactly.
And I'm
Location,
always doing
location,
that no matter where I'm at. Right.
Yeah. So I think the takeaway on the whole Zestimate thing is, for the public at least, they shouldn't be relying on it either. Really, if they really want to understand the value of their property, they should be talking to a broker or an agent or
an appraisal.
getting an appraisal
Yeah.
done.
Pay the $400, $500 and get an appraisal.
That's the only way to get a real, true snapshot of what this property is worth. The Zestimate is more of just an online gimmick. Is that what we're kind of
basically? Yeah, it's
I mean, I think it's data.
Too many data points. I think
it's a broad brush is what it is. It's a
Yeah.
very broad brush.
Yeah, no, I can agree with that. I just wanted to kind of play devil's advocate there a little bit about maybe there's some value there that isn't necessarily the accuracy of the value, more the fact that people are looking at it and you can use that as a marketing strategy to understand where you might land if you market the property a certain price.
Well, you got to, when you're at the appointment and you're at the person's kitchen table and you're telling them that their house is only worth X or it is worth, Y, that they've looked at the Zestimate. So you got to either justify why that's wrong.
Yeah, you need to be able to articulate
why you're higher than they are.
Yeah.
You said 500,000 and Zestimate only says 450. Why?
Yeah.
Zillow says.
And I used to use the term a long time ago. I used to say, well, as long as Zillow's buying the house, you're okay.
Yeah.
But they did buy houses and they lost a ton of money. So it's I don't say that anymore, Yeah.
Yeah, that's true too. Okay, so just to kind of wrap this up, maybe, a little bit earlier than some of our other episodes, but I think when it comes to these market analysis, there's a certain art to it that goes along with the science of it. And I think that's kind of why I want to distinguish between a CMA, a BPO, and an appraiser. The appraiser is really more into the science of it, the technical details, the numbers, what you can adjust for, and then here you go.
And again, the house is already sold most of the time.
Right.
They are sitting with a purchase agreement, and all they're really doing is trying to make sure that the bank doesn't lend more than 80% of the value.
Right.
So a lot easier. As a CMA, you have to, like you said, craft what are the other houses of similar features and similar amenities. What are they selling for? What are they asking for? What are they pending at? And what kind of time was on the market? That's another thing. If somebody says, "Oh, I want 50,000 more," I say, "Fine, give me a 7-year listing contract, and we might be able to get you that."
Right.
Because it's going to take that long to sell that property. So a good CMA is going to narrow it in, zero it in, and have you sell it in a reasonable time frame.
Yeah,
or in your time frame.
Even in the
seller.
CMAs that I put together, not only do I include the property listing, I also include all the property photos.
Yeah.
So that they can easily compare and be like, hey, look, they got a completely updated kitchen.
Right.
Your kitchen's outdated. So just keep that in mind. Not saying, oh, your kitchen sucks or whatever. Just keep that in mind. So when we get to the price, you can understand why we're going at $400 and not $449.
Years ago, I've taken people out of from a listing appointment. I said, let's go look at that house that's on the market and actually walk them through that house and say, okay, now how does your house compare with that one that's up for sale?
Yeah, that's a really good idea too.
So,
Chuck, do you remember back in the day, and I don't want to name names because I can't think of the name, but there was an agent who was also an appraiser. And when he was on the agent side of listings, his listings were always overpriced. And when you would call him and say, like, I can't find any comps, he would come up with well, I have access to comps that you guys don't see, and I have this and I have that. And he would go into a spiel like, I used to manage a J.C. Penney's. Do you remember who I'm talking about?
I can hear those words, but I do not remember who you're talking about.
The funniest darn thing, but it was just weird. And yet it seemed like when he was the appraiser on one of your listings, you never found value, you know?
It's funny you said that because that reminded me of Will Ferrell on Saturday Night Live when the family's all eating dinner and they're all like super quiet, but you can hear their knives and forks clinking on the plate as they cut their food and eating it. And he'll turn to his daughter and he'll be like, "So, honey, how was your day today?" You know, you hear clink, 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 clink. And then she'd be like, "Shut up, Dad." He'd be like, "I drive a Dodge Stratus. You will show me some respect."
I don't know what the JCPenney thing had to do with anything, but I used to manage JCPenney's. And I'm like,
I used to manage a JCPenney's.
Do you remember the one VA appraiser?
Oh, yeah. I remember that name, so I won't say it.
Every single deal, he could never find value.
No matter. Never find it.
Well, never reach the
I know,
value.
but it just makes him sound like challenged.
No, I honestly think
he
was trying to get like an extra fee. Because if he had to do a reinspect, he got an extra fee. So I think he was chasing the fee all the time.
I see.
But never did he hit. I mean, you always had issues. You always had to fix stuff on his houses that you never had to fix on any other appraiser. Yep. You had to fix his stuff.
That's funny.
And he was a second generation guy doing the same business out of Centerline, Michigan.
Over on 10 Mile Road.
You know, but my God, it was every single time with that guy.
Yeah, that's hilarious.
I haven't seen or heard that name in years.
I know. Well, I think he's out of the business or retired or whatever.
Yeah, I think the other guy is too. Or
the guy who asked for the pictures.
He's in the big real estate in the ground.
The last piece of real estate we'll all have, right?
Well, on that note,
all right. You know, I think that to summarize it, though, no matter what you do, whether you hire an appraiser or an agent, again, back to what we've said throughout all our podcasts. Make sure they're experienced. Make sure they know what they're doing.
That's what it comes
there's our word again. Yep. The broker experience.
Absolutely.
That's it.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you guys. I appreciate your time today. And thank you everybody for watching and listening. And by the way, I want to mention that you will be able to listen to this podcast on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all other major podcasting platforms. All right.
Thank you.
Peace out till the next time.